introduce to you today, Gail Averette and Sheila Sullivan. Gail and Sheila are some young ladies who are doing great work in the Cleveland area in special needs ministry. Gail is the inclusion ministry coordinator for St.Timothy Missionary Baptist Church, and Sheila is a national comprehensive victims advocate who works in healthcare as a prevention specialist and sexual reproductive health educator. So they both bring a wealth of experience to this topic. We had them write a blog post several weeks ago about this, and we wanted to invite them today just to be able to talk a little bit more in depth about the things that were shared in the blog post, but also to help ministry leaders think through these things. The post was written more from a parent's perspective, but we know that ministry leaders see a lot of things and want to definitely be prepared for recognizing anything that could be, harmful to children or even adults with intellectual disabilities. So thank you, ladies, so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're just delighted that you could be here. So I'm going to just jump right in and, this is a sensitive topic, and we want, obviously, as educators, as ministry leaders, you want to be careful about how you are talking about things, and it's important to use like the right language so that everybody who's involved can understand. So I just want to start with some of the basics. So for ministry leaders who are watching, what would you define as both appropriate, and we're talking about sexual type behavior in all of this conversation today. So what are some things that you would describe as maybe, appropriate behavior that you might expect to see in a child that has maybe developmental disabilities, as a child, and then, as they grow up and even into adulthood, what are some things that you would share about appropriate versus inappropriate behavior?
Okay, first we need to pretty much define appropriate and inappropriate behavior. We have to understand that appropriate behavior is behavior that crosses all age limits.
Yep.
Okay, if it doesn't look right at 15, then it probably doesn't look right at 5.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we have to be very mindful of that. The other thing that we have to discuss, that we have to really think about, is inappropriate behavior is the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Our children have to have boundaries.
Right.
And what happens is a lot of times we stretch those boundaries for our children who have disabilities instead of giving them clear-cut boundaries. Mm-hmm. And if we give them clear-cut boundaries, crossing boundaries with people who are predators mm-hmm. is a very easy step.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So during COVID, especially, should have been a very good time to teach boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because we were in a place where we're saying, well, you need to be a certain length apart. Mm-hmm. We were in a place where we said that we shouldn't be touching everybody all the time.
Right.
And what we need to tell our kids is this: you ask permission and you give permission. Mm-hmm. What is appropriate? We don't touch people in our bathing suit areas, and people don't touch us in our bathing suit areas.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
That's a very good descriptor for a kid of any age, a child of any age, all the way up into adulthood for someone who has an intellectual disability.
Yeah.
Giving them some.
I wanted to add that behavior is learned, and what might be inappropriate in a church setting, like a Sunday school classroom or church service, may be allowed by the parent of this individual to do in their bedroom. Mm-hmm. And they may be just trying to do self-pleasuring types of activities that their parents have given them permission to do. the inappropriateness is where it's being done. So we have to be careful not to make the child feel bad if this is something they've been doing at home, just because they're doing it in the Sunday school classroom or the church service in the sanctuary. We have to be able to be sensitive to the individual child, because it's going to look different for each and every child, just like our sexual behaviors, likes and dislikes look different. It's going to look different for each individual, but we have to be careful not to condemn,
Right.
but to maybe just separate them, move them away from people seeing what is being done. It would be helpful if we knew that ahead of time before they entered our Sunday school classroom or our church for church service, some type of intake form. So we would know to have a blanket or something to cover them with, because what's inappropriate to me might not be inappropriate to their parents.
So, I mean, that raises an excellent point, because, and actually when we were setting up the blog post that you ladies wrote, that was fabulous. And I encourage the viewers to go check that out on the Church for Every Child blog on the Key Ministry website. But I was talking with my colleague, Beth Golick, who's a special needs ministry coordinator at her church. And she said, this is an issue that they see all the time. And I mean, just a question for you, Gail. Do you use an intake form at your church, in your inclusion ministry, that addresses this kind of thing? Because I think those kinds of forms are used, broadly in kids ministry, disability ministry or not. So I think that's an excellent point that you raise, that, that's the place where parents can address this to try to, head off any issues that might come up with this behavior, if the ministry leaders know about it. So, I mean, is this something that you all use?
We do have an intake form. When we first went out with our first session, we thought the intake form was perfect, and we realized we left some key things out of it. So we've been modifying it as we go, and we haven't been back in person because of COVID. So when we start up again in person, we don't have in-person Sunday school. We don't have in-person youth activities of any kind at our church yet. And we definitely don't have the inclusion ministry in-person sessions yet. But the intake form may be a form that has to adapt as you realize who you're going to be servicing in your ministry or at your church.
Right.
So yeah, we do use one.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, and also we have to learn that when those things happen, that we have to address the behavior,
right,
and not make the child feel as though they're a bad person.
Yes. Yes.
So it may look like asking the child if we can go somewhere else,
mm-hmm.
and then having a conversation about where these are good places and bad places to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And not good or bad behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah, and Beth just commented in the chat that, a time and place, that Sunday school really isn't the time and place.
And that goes to teaching your child boundaries.
Right.
It's just like we teach our children very basic things. Well, you have to go to the bathroom, you take your clothes down when you get in the bathroom.
Right. Right.
We don't say that when you do it, you just have to, wherever you are.
Right.
So we have to, as parents, before we send our kids out, we also have to learn how to create boundaries, mm-hmm. and to not be afraid to create boundaries, because right. we have no problem with saying, don't touch the stove.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I'm saying that if you need to touch yourself, it can't be in the common areas. Mm-hmm. We have private places, mm-hmm. to do these things.
Right.
And with referring back to what Beth said, not only do you need to have some type of intake questioning going on when you get a new Sunday school student in your classroom, that's for anybody, even without an intellectual disability. You Absolutely. Need to know a little of their background. What kind of home environment are they coming from? Right. Because a lot of these behaviors that we see in quote unquote normal kids are things they see at home.
Right.
And if the mommy and daddy and Uncle Joe and Uncle John and Uncle Phil and all the uncles that come by are doing these things in the home they live in, they may not have a clue that what they're doing is wrong.
Right. Right. Well, and that's that leads to an important point about, vulnerabilities. I mean, statistics say that people with disabilities are significantly more vulnerable to sexual abuse, at any age group. So, what are some of the things that either you've seen churches do to try to protect children, individuals with disabilities of any age, or, what are some of the things that you all are actively doing in your churches to protect individuals?
I screened my volunteers before we got started. I didn't do a criminal background check, but I screened them to the point where I felt like they would be good volunteers. I also made sure nobody was in a room by themselves with a child. That's very important. We had Bible buddies, and each individual sat with one of the special need individuals, but no one was in a room by themselves where there would be any chance of anybody thinking wrongdoing was going on. So I'm protecting my volunteers as well as the child by having certain areas where we would meet and greet. If they had to go to the bathroom and they needed assistance, 2 volunteers would go in, not just one, because that's a very vulnerable place for a child to misinterpret if they needed help wiping themselves, misinterpreting that if somebody were to come in. So 2 by 2, just like the ark, we would not let a volunteer go in with a child alone. Also, you have vulnerable means you're easily wounded. So children with special needs are not necessarily easily wounded because they love everybody, they accept everything, they reach out to strangers. It's the parents, the caregivers, and the ministry leaders that are going to be wounded if something happens to this child.
All right, it looks like they dropped off. Can I say a few things that are going on in the chat?
You betcha.
Okay. So one thing that I wanted to share is knowing the language that the parent uses, or perhaps the parent and the school use, can be really helpful. So for some families, it might be, hey, this isn't the time or place. Or perhaps, hands out of pants, or even like an icon that shows, no hands down the pants. And that's something you can just give us a little reminder. And I'm the mom of 3 boys. So like, I mean, it happens. And so, and Diane is sharing in the chat that hands out is good and most know it from school. So that, I mean, this is something that, it's not unfamiliar to, to at school, at home, at church, whatever. So knowing the language is really helpful. And again, there are visuals. So for kids who do better with visuals, you can do that. Also, if it's a group setting and, you don't want to embarrass a kid by calling them out, and even just using that little visual kind of, to the side it can be really helpful. Diana also shared in the chat that one of their families would send their son to church wearing an athletic cup. So that's a clever way to get around it. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the protection policy of never having one child and one adult alone together. And that's just really important. And I know for those of us in children's ministry, that's something that is, usually part of the volunteer onboarding process. Different churches call it different things. At my church, we call it ministry in the light. And again, that's just never having one adult or one volunteer, whatever, and one child alone together. As a matter of fact, our casual way of saying it is, if you're going to the bathroom, it takes 3 to pee. We don't have that in writing, but that's kind of what it is. So, all right, it looks like they're jumping back on. So I'll go off and let the discussions continue.
Okay. Well, and as they're getting, settled back online here, great time to just let you know
Okay.
if you're participating, if you're registered for the webinar and you have a comment, please feel free to share it in the chat. And then if you're watching on Facebook, definitely share comments there and we will work them in as we are able to. So ladies, are you able to join again? Is everything working okay? It looks like you're muted, so if you're talking, I can't hear you just yet.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. I can hear you, but I can't see you yet.
And they just got muted again.
Okay.
When it works, that technology is great, and when it doesn't,
Right.
Exactly.
And when it doesn't, it doesn't.
yeah.
Okay, we can hear you. You need to hit your start video button. So we can hear you.
It's my, according to this, it's connected to my car. Hold on. Yeah.
Well, while we are getting all of this kind of connected, just want to again draw attention to the article that Gail and Sheila wrote. It was posted on October 7th, 2021, and we'll include that in the show notes after we're finished here today. So definitely check that out. They have some great resources and information in there too. We're just kind of expounding on that today. So.
And all of those articles that Catherine's referring to can be found at keyministry.org. So there's the blog is linked to there. So keyministry.org.
Well, I have just a question for you, Beth, while we're just, waiting for the technical glitch to get worked out on Gail and Sheila's end. Physical boundaries are really, important and maybe easier to deal with now because COVID, a pandemic blessing. But, what are some ways that at your church you guys have enforced boundaries, and helped children with disabilities understand about enforcing boundaries? What are some things that have worked well?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's really hard sometimes because, and I think Gail and Sheila alluded to this earlier, but some of our students kind of lack some of those personal boundaries. And so like during COVID, that was like a learning experience. But where I see it most with the students that I work with, so a lot of our families have been attending since their kids were really little. Mm-hmm. And in general, I mean, we tend, we have like young students in any part of children's ministry. I mean, like, hugging, like that's kind of part of being around little kids. But as the kids transition into teens and adults, it becomes less appropriate to, have the hugging and that type of thing. And actually some of our students, because of maybe their IEP or whatever goals they're working on at school or in their workplace, some of that behavior is really not allowed because of how it just, the boundaries kind of blur too much, and maybe they're too strong of huggers, or, they just have a problem violating people's personal space. And so, there are some students that we're not supposed to hug because of that's what they're working on at school. Mm-hmm. Or even not doing high fives and all that because they're just trying to help keep that boundary. So right. I really recommend having that communication with parents and caregivers so that you're being consistent with what they're doing at home and what they're doing at school. So that, again, you're using the same language, the same, if this is how you're saying, okay, remember personal space, and you're just putting your hands kind of up and down in front of you as that visual, if that's what they do at school or at home, then that's really helpful if you're doing it at church as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think those are some really good points. So, so
And
ladies.
COVID has helped a lot with that.
Oh
because,
yeah, absolutely.
You know, we can say, no, remember, we're keeping personal space.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, and the signs, I mean, like I'm at my church today and, there's signs everywhere, maintain 6 feet distance. So, those reminders are there for, adults who don't have disabilities too, and kids without.
Right.
So it looks
Okay.
like
I can see them. You're
Yes.
still on mute though. Still on mute.
So bear with us just a second, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. It's an important discussion.
All right.
We're back.
Are we there?
I'm out.
Okay.
All righty. Well,
All righty.
hopefully you're off of your car connection, right? So
Right,
Yes.
right.
I know.
And we're off the computer too, so.
Okay.
So now we're on my phone. So
Well, but you still look
Technology
good.
just
We
is
can,
what
we
it
can
is
see you
today.
well, and it, it's a big enough, view of from the screen. So, I would not have known, we would not have known if you hadn't told us. So,
Okay.
well,
So
so
Beth is right that COVID helped with a lot of this boundary situation, and the new normal means that we're probably going to adapt some of these behaviors moving forward for the rest of our lives.
right.
So
Exactly.
it's going to be real easy to have everybody working with children to use the same boundaries now because of COVID.
Right.
Even though we're trying to protect our volunteers and protect our children in the same light.
Yeah. I don't know if you ladies were able to hear, but Beth said that they have a rule that it's not a written rule, but that it takes 3 to pee.
Well, basically, that's what I'm doing. 2 volunteers and the individual, that's 3.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and some of them may wear diapers. You need all that in your intake information. And you need the caregiver or the parent to let you know in advance of them attending your church service or Sunday school or inclusion ministry time, what their habits are, what usually takes place.
Right.
Yeah, excellent. Well, unfortunately, the world we live in, there are things that happen. You were alluding to, sometimes children see things at home that are just not appropriate, that are crossing those boundaries that, you want to try to enforce at home. So, if you see, if you have this instance where a child is really displaying some behavior that's just inappropriate, as a ministry leader, what should your first response be, both with the child and then also with their caregiver?
My first response as a ministry leader would be, under my breath, start praying, because this is something that is unexpected but expected at the same time. Get the individual away from the community areas and have 2 volunteers sit with that individual in a different area. Contact the family member or caregiver, which should be on your intake form, how to contact them. If I had all the money in the world, what I would do would have pagers, and we would give pagers to the caregiver or the parent. And if we had trouble with their loved one, we would just page them, beep them, and they would come out of the church service or come from home or give us a call so we could find out where this behavior stems from.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be very delicate, because if this stems from home, parents are going to be defensive,
Right.
And might not want to respond to you appropriately. So the person that calls the parent or the caregiver has to have adequate enough empathy to not be accusatory when they call. Just say, hi, something just happened, and we just want to know if you've ever experienced this in your home, or and tell us how you want us to handle it. Not putting blame on the caregiver or the parent initially, down the road, if you think it's coming from a caregiver or parent, or even a ministry leader at your church, it is a reportable offense, and you have to report it. But whether it's true or not, if the child appears to be doing something and you don't get the response from the parent or caregiver that you want, and you suspect abuse or them being wounded some kind of sexually way in their home environment, you do have to report it.
Right. Right.
You are a mandated reporter. The other thing is you have to be mindful of where that behavior comes, where it happens.
Right.
Does it only happen around certain people?
Right.
Does it only happen in certain environments?
Mhm.
Does it only happen during certain situations?
Mhm. Right. And what's causing that?
Yeah,
You know,
what are the
why would
triggers?
that person act? Why would the child act that way? You know, around certain people.
Right. And
Yeah,
those are the big red flags. Does it only happen when a certain person comes into the room?
Mhm.
Is it how they react to other people?
Right.
Because that can be a very big key on how things work in this child's life.
Mhm. Yeah.
Also, how this child, sometimes we have to look at how does this child communicate.
Right. Right. Yeah, you know, one of my things that I say all the time, I'm sure my family just gets sick of me saying it, but behavior is communication. It doesn't matter who you are. You know, the way you behave is communicating something. And for an
Mhm.
individual with a disability, you know, particularly, you know, very vulnerable individuals with significant disabilities, I mean, they're communicating something, whether it's, you know, discomfort, boredom, abuse, you know, they're trying to
Pleasure.
communicate something.
They could be communicating
Exactly.
pleasure. This pleasures them. They could be doing what they see pleasure their mother,
Right.
and not know that it's wrong, because shame on her, she's doing it in their eyesight.
Yeah.
So they don't see anything wrong with it. Mama does it in front of me, so why can't I do it in front of you?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So a couple of comments in the chat. A couple folks say that, you know, every time they have drop off, they have the best number so that the parent or the caregiver can be texted if something, you know, something comes up.
absolutely.
And, you know, Beth said that in, you know, their ministry, you know, they use texting as well. So they don't, you know, have a need for any pagers or any other device. I remember years ago in my church, I don't think we had pagers, but we had, every child was given like a number, and there was like a screen off to the side of the sanctuary. And if there was an issue, that number would be shown up on the screen so that the parents knew, you know, who needed to go to the nursery or children's area. So, so, you know, discernment is the word that was just really coming to mind as you ladies were talking about, you know, just, you know, trying to understand this behavior, you know, where it's coming from. And it does require a lot of sensitivity, so that, you know, the issue is handled well from the child's perspective and also from the parents. But so, I mean, if you do believe that there's some abuse going on, you know, what are some of the things that you recommend that a ministry leader should do? I mean, let's say you have that conversation with the parent, and maybe it's not going well, and you really think that the behavior is telling you a bigger, you know, darker story. You know, what would you recommend that ministry leaders do next?
Well, okay, thanks. It depends, and I'm sorry to say this, it depends on the pastor and the governing body of that individual church, because sometimes they restrict you from getting that deep into the situation. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but sometimes that is what happens. So you have to take it upon yourself as an individual, a child advocate like my sister-in-law, and say to yourself, and I know this is going to be really corny, what would Jesus do?
Right.
And what Jesus would do would be to protect the child at all costs.
Right.
You may lose a member of your church because of this, but if you call the appropriate individuals to take care of that child, then you know you've done what you needed to do to maintain the safety of that child. Doesn't mean they're going to be away from their family forever. It's just like spousal abuse or any other kind of abuse. The powers that be give them an opportunity to go through some kind of rehabilitation to show and prove that this will never happen again to this child. And then the child may be reunited with their family. It might just be mom needs to get rid of her boyfriend because the teenage girl has been saying, Ma, when you ain't here, Johnny is touching me. And mom's like, oh, please, because Johnny's paying her bills and she don't want to lose Johnny. So you have to be able to, first of all, without a doubt, listen without judging. Don't immediately chop the child off when he or she is trying to tell you something that's happening to them.
Right.
If you know their communication abilities, if they're nonverbal and they start pointing to different body parts, crying or whatever, you know something is going on that needs to be addressed. As a ministry leader, how far can you go might be how far your church lets you go. Because there could be lawsuits pending you accusing a parent of doing something that they adamantly deny.
Right.
So this is the time where the whole governing body of the church and the ministry leaders need to be on one accord.
Yeah.
And prayer always is appropriate. And then the bottom line is keep that child, teenager, or young adult safe.
Yes.
By whatever means necessary.
So
Err
I'm
on
not
the
sure,
caution of
I'm
the
not sure
child's
like what
safety.
the requirements are for mandated reporters in different states. It looks like you're about to talk about that, Sheila. You go ahead.
We
I don't
have
want
to
to steal
really
anything
deal
you're gonna
with
say.
if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
The first thing you do is you have to talk to the child and listen.
Yeah.
Than what you expect. The child may have something to say that may make sense, and it may just be a outward behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You have a child, for an example, we had a child that was in care who was a lot more independent. Something happened, and now the child had to be toileted. It made the child feel uncomfortable because they didn't want to go back to that.
Mm-hmm.
It looked unusual to people who were not aware of the situation.
Right. Right.
So what happened basically is people called, there were things done, but the parents were talked to first. Always document everything.
Yeah.
The first rule of anything is document it.
Yeah.
If you see something, write it down. Know what day it was. Know all the situation, the who, what, when, where, and how.
Mm-hmm.
Because what may happen is that it may be something that's not, but you have it documented.
Mm-hmm.
But if it is, you also have it documented.
Right.
Your job is to make sure that child is safe regardless.
Right.
Because that may also mean that that child is not the only one affected. That may mean if there's other children in the house and there is something going on, that everybody is affected and everybody needs to be removed.
Right.
Or it could mean that there's something that is particular with this child that may not actually be abuse, but the child is still uncomfortable.
Right.
And that means the child still needs help.
Right.
So you still may need to talk to the parent about getting the child some other kinds of help.
You know, one of the things that we talk about off and on in Key Ministry is that mental health ministry is not just having a support group at your church. It's like coming alongside people in the community to help reduce life stresses. And so I can totally see situations where, there's a significant stressor in the home. Maybe there's been long-term unemployment, and tensions are just really high, and the child is behaving in a way that is getting attention because mom and dad are so distracted because of all of the stuff that's going on in their lives. They're just trying to hold it together. So it's so important, like you said, to understand what is going on and to have those conversations, even though it's uncomfortable. It's just really important, and that is really a place where the church can come alongside in many instances, and just whether it's like in my church, we used to have a car ministry, a car repair ministry, and there were a lot of guys who were here, maybe some women too, who love to repair cars. And we gave away like a couple dozen cars in a period of about a year to people in our area who needed transportation. If you have transportation, you can get to work. You can get your children to childcare. And so, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's also very connected to the reality that people are living with, and helping to understand, what's really going on with a family who is part of, that the local body of Christ that you're serving. So,
and be very mindful of things that have changed with a child while they're with you. If you have a child that you see every week that behaves in one way, and all of a sudden there is a change,
mm-hmm.
Those are real big red flags.
Yeah.
And you might want to have a conversation, and it may not be you to have the conversation.
Right.
The conversation needs to happen with the child and someone the child trusts and feels comfortable with.
Right.
So it may be their Bible buddy.
Mm-hmm.
You may have to have those conversations with the Bible buddy that says, I notice this is going on with Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had a conversation with him? Is something happening at home?
Mm-hmm.
And then you still need to document it. We still need to be very vigilant about documentation, because documentation sometimes is the difference between somebody being in a good space and being not in a good space when something has to happen.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share also that the volunteer, the ministry leader, the pastor may think something is abuse, and it may very well be abuse. The child, the teenager, the young adult doesn't even think it's abuse.
Yes.
Because it's something that's happening to them consistently on a regular basis. It could be adult, it could be their sibling.
Right.
This could get really, really, really ugly, really, really, really fast.
Right.
And
because what is familiar is familiar.
If they don't think of it as abuse, they may pop up in your Sunday school and be perfectly normal, and you have no idea. So like the mainstream schools, we, in my ministry, we do phone calls to catch up now. We would have been doing face-to-face home visits,
Mm-hmm.
just to let the caregiver or parent know that this inclusion ministry includes them,
Right.
and that we're there for them too. And if we were, before COVID, we were going to and we still do make 3 home visits a year.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the parent just meets us at the door. But those are the times we're actually giving them a gift at Christmas time or Easter time or whatever time, and back to school time. And those are 3 times in the year that we can have eyes on their home situations. And I think that's very important as a ministry leader to realize our ministry goes beyond the walls of our church or education building.
Absolutely.
If we are seriously called to minister to children, you got to pick up and go where the children are. Sometimes go to their games, go to their schools, sometimes go to their homes, and you'll be able to sense some things that you won't be able to sense in just that hour in your Sunday school class.
Right. Yeah, we say in mental health ministry that mental health inclusion ministry is family ministry. And that's exactly what you're talking about, because, families that have what, are so-called special needs in this world, in our culture, I mean, they need a lot of support that, in the best of circumstances, they need a lot of support, at a minimum, prayer support, and some relationships where they can really, connect with others who understand the realities of their life, and, and can just kind of sit with their struggles and support them as a friend. So.
Yes,
Well,
Selena Miller has been a speaker for Key Ministry in the past.
yes.
And she has that mother-to-mother support group where mothers feel safe sharing their ups and downs of raising a child with special needs. It is not easy. It doesn't end at age 18 or even age 21.
No.
And so support groups like that are very, very beneficial. You don't have to be a PhD. You don't have to be a medical individual. It was Selena, one mother with a special needs son, 2 other mothers with special needs children. And it has been very successful. I wanted to add that component onto our inclusion ministry, that we would pull the parents to a smaller setting, offer them some coffee or sodas or whatever, and just say, let's talk about this. I don't want to wait and see what their issues are because they may be embarrassed to share. But
Right.
I could pick a certain subject, losing your temper, your husband being mad at you because you're spending all this time with Johnny instead of him, or your other children are jealous and they may be picking on Johnny even when you don't know it.
Right.
So we would pick a subject. My goal is still to eventually pick a subject that might be prevalent in homes that parents would be embarrassed to share, and have those discussions, those roundtable discussions, while the young people were eating and playing games and watching movies and doing crafts and listening to a Bible study. I wanted there to be at least a 30-minute mom to parent conversation.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic idea. And I think you should actually start it with a Zoom link like this, because I bet you have a bunch of people show up.
You probably are right. I just feel so uncomfortable doing this kind of ministry in a Zoom call. It's so personal, and it's so, it's, if God says so, okay, but but right now, I just wish I could just look in their eyes so they can see my sincerity.
Yeah.
Look at them and know I'm dealing with the same thing you're dealing with. That's hard to express in a Zoom call. I mean, I try to do it, but you don't get everybody that you wish you could get on those Zoom calls. But if they're bringing their child to your church service, you got them for at least an hour.
Right, right.
And
Well,
sometimes it just be an ooh-ha moment, We
So-
don't talk about the fact that it's okay to say that I'm tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're tired when you don't have a child with disabilities.
You bet.
So, I remember having a class with parents that says, you know what? You love your children every day, but you don't always like them.
Yes.
And the parents looking around like they wanted to say something. I was like, it's okay to say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The wounding part of being a part of a family with a child with special needs, everybody's wounded to a certain degree because you didn't expect this to be part of your lifestyle.
Right.
So you're wounded. You tithe, you're a volunteer in your church, you don't curse, you don't drink, you don't smoke, and all of a sudden now you've got why God questions going on, and then your children, your other children, and then your spouse. And I mean, everybody's wounded to a certain degree, and you have to be sensitive to the fact that we did not get a brochure when our child was diagnosed with a special intellectual need. Nobody gives us a book. This is what you do on Mondays. This is what you do on Tuesdays. This is what you tell your spouse. This is what you tell their siblings. And we have a lot of assumptions that we know what we're doing. And we don't always know what we're doing, and it's okay, it's okay.
Right. And that's a huge reason why Key Ministry even exists. I mean, honestly, because parents do feel so isolated and
I am so
like they're doing something wrong in their parenting, or they have done things wrong in their parenting, or that nobody's ever had to deal with the kinds of things that they're dealing with. So what you just said is very true. So, well, we are getting close to the top of the hour. I definitely want to make sure that we talk about, what kinds of training or resources or materials do you either use at your church, for your volunteers or your ministry leaders, or what do you recommend that other churches or even parents access to help them understand, how to deal with this kind of behavior in ministry settings or even in home?
In the church setting, as a coordinator, I try to coordinate training based on things that could happen or based on things that have happened. So if we were in a session and something happened, we would immediately have a post-conversation training session about what we did, what we could have did differently, what we're going to do in the future, because you're never going to be prepared for every single possibility. Training and resources are exhausting online. And I have connected with DOC and SOAR. I've connected with a lot of different ministries here in Ohio and in Indiana that have had inclusion ministries longer than me. And when I'm struggling with what to do, I ask, because I don't have all the answers. And I ask, and my ministry is in an urban setting, and most of the people that I've communicated with are not in the urban setting. So I sometimes have to adapt because of financial issues. I have to adapt because of racial issues. I have to adapt because of social issues, but I still seek out kindred spirits that are going through what our church members may be going through, and the community individuals that we're trying to reach out to. So there's training, and then there's training. First of all, the first thing about training is, do you love God? And can I see it in your presence? Right. Don't just give me some words. Don't give me lip service. Can I see it in what you do with your own children? Can I see it with what you do with your spouse? Can I see it with what you do in other areas of the church? So that's the biggest training. The Bible gives us so much information that we can use and modify for each and every church's ministry approach. And then I'm a nurse by training, so then I have to get clinical, and I have to talk about the 3 to P kinds of things, the don't be alone with the individuals. I did some background questionnaires with my volunteers. Some didn't want to answer the questions. You're not my volunteer. It's as simple as that. You can go and be an usher. You don't have to be part of the inclusion ministry if you don't want to answer these questions. I answered them for everybody, and so therefore I expected everybody to answer them for me. And training is ongoing. It's never ending. Like nurses, doctors, you have to have continuing education. So as a matter of fact, next month, when I meet with my team, we're going to talk about simple things like service and evangelism. Because when you're trying to reach out into the community to the special need population and their families, you got to go a different way than you might go to another church and speak at another church, because you're speaking to like people. But when you go out into the community and try to draw someone to Christ and make disciples of their parents and them, make them feel like they are in a service, in a church where they are received and accepted, even though they may be different, you got to have some very dedicated, devoted volunteers, and you've got to make sure they're okay too.
That's right.
One of my volunteers, really sweet woman, lost her daughter, lost her uncle. I mean, you don't expect her to still be able to do what she did for the ministry, which she's going through so much herself. So you've got to have, you've got to love on your volunteers. You got to make sure they understand what you want of them. You've got to give them some signs of appreciation, whatever love language they need to know they're appreciated. And it's a never-ending classroom. It's a never-ending classroom.
Mhm. Excellent. Excellent. We've got a couple of comments in the Facebook Live. Selena Miller watching, and she appreciates your kind words, but she just was talking about how documentation is so important, and that she loves your church, and has blessed her son and her with wonderful care packages, just like the love of Christ. And she also comments that, you're, as a special needs parent or a parent with a child with disabilities, that you're in a constant state of grief. I mean, that is no lie. And it doesn't mean that you don't love your child. It's just, you have to grieve what your expectations were.
And that's where the wounded is.
Go
That's
away.
what I meant. Thank you, Selena, sweetie. That's what I meant when I said everybody's wounded, because this is not what you expected for your child.
That's
not
right.
at all. So we're all wounded.
Right. And then she concludes with saying, you have the true love for Christ and his people. And I would agree.
Thank you, sweetie. I love you.
Let's see there. And then Barry Newman shared a link to, I guess, Barb Newman's book on accessible gospel inclusive worship. And we'll put that in the show notes. And Barb was one of the founders of All Belong Center for Inclusive Education. So anyway, well, we are almost at the top of the hour. I just appreciate both of you so much for being willing to share today and the blog post, and any last minute comments that you'd like to make before we sign off today. And let me just say here, I would love to have you back. Not next week, but in the future soon, to just, talk about some of the things that, maybe even about the family issues, because that is just such an important part of whether it's traditional disability inclusion ministry or mental health ministry. That is just, you really have to have a heart for the whole family when you step into this. So anyway, I don't want to take all this time. So, however you would like to conclude.
I did give Catherine my list of resources, and one of the ones in there is Patricia Parker, who is my go-to. If I don't know where to go, I go to her first, and she's like a resource guru for people who are caring for special need individuals or who are parents to special need individuals. And she has helped me so much because she told me things that I didn't even know I had the opportunity to use. And had she not been there for me, and I just went and said, look, this is happening, especially during COVID. My children are getting on my nerves. I don't have a break from them because they're not going to their shelter day program. I'm losing my mind. And she would say, well, have you thought about this? Have you went over there? Have you asked the county board if they can get an iPad? And all of these things she popped up with, and I hadn't thought of any of them. Mm-hmm. So she's one of the resources. She only has a Facebook page right now, but she's one of my resources that I shared with Catherine that I would like to share with everybody before this Zoom call ends.
Okay. Yep. We'll
and
definitely.
the other thing that's important is your ministry leaders and your parents have to come up with a self-care plan.
Yep.
Because we take care of everybody else. But if you want to be able to take care of everybody else, you've got to also learn to take care of yourself.
Amen.
That's right.
Which most parents of special needs don't.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of parents wind up in divorce. That's why a lot of parents wind up being depressed. We're already wounded. It's not going to take much to take us over the edge unless we get the support we need.
Right. Well, gosh, you ladies, thank you so much for all that you're doing. And Beth just commented in the chat that, you know, we are blessed in Cleveland with some amazing women. And I would agree that, you know, there is just phenomenal ministry that's going on to the greater Cleveland area, but specifically to individuals and families who are part of the disability community there. So thank you both so much for your time today. If you have any other questions for Gail and Sheila, just feel free to reach out to me, Catherine with a C at keyministry.org, and I'll be happy to route the information to them. And again, ladies, I'd love to do this again in a few months. We'll send some ideas for you and have that conversation scheduled on our events page. And just in case you haven't checked out our events page lately, keyministry.org/events. We do monthly discussions with disability inclusion ministry leaders on ministry in a hybrid environment, thanks COVID. But it's a great group. If you haven't joined us before, there's lots of great information that's shared there every first Monday of the month. So there'll be this upcoming Monday. And then in about 2 weeks, we're going to have another discussion on sexual abuse prevention with Bree Edwards. She is a counselor. She's worked extensively with children who have suffered sexual abuse trauma. So you'll want to join us for that as well. So for Key Ministry, I'm Catherine Boyle. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you again next time.
All righty, bye.